basic concept of quality hire is it is the value provided by employees after they moved into a new position. And where it gets a little into definition is that can be attributed, did you put the right person in the right role and welcome to the organization in the right way? So that's kind of what quality of hire is. It really should probably technically be called value of new employees, but no one's going to change the name.
And when we say quality of hire, what about the quality of people that we never hired? We never came into the funnel in the first place.
That is the great question. You cannot know, I say you never hire the applicants that don't apply. But I'd also say you can never know if you have a good hiring process if you don't measure quality of hiring. It may not be broken miserably, right? But are you hiring the best people? If you don't measure quality of hire, you don't know.
You're talking about data, you're talking about quality of hire being measured, AI systems, traditional systems, it could be anything. But in today's world, do you think that AI can improve decision-making based on, what your, matrices might be around quality of hire? And is that really going to make a proactive, positive shifts towards, data-driven, more objective ways of fine-tuning the process itself?
Absolutely. AI is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it can definitely improve hiring. It can also make bad hiring decisions at scale. And there's nothing good about making bad hires quickly, which AI can do. And it can do it, and you can think it's making great hires, but you don't know if you don't measure the actual quality of hire.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hyreo Rise series of podcast. Today, I've got a very, very interesting guest and a very, very interesting and a relevant topic in today's world of talent acquisition. We're going to talk and examine a little bit about quality of hire, what factors really lead to, the quality of hire. How do we measure it? How is it evolving in today's context? And I can't think of somebody better than Steve Hunt. Thank you, Steve, so much for joining. And for the audience, Steve comes with over a couple of decades in enabling complex tech in the HR space, somebody who's passionate about creating great workplaces, a scientist, a practitioner, an HR evangelist, using technology in that space, and an author. Lovely to have you, Steve, on the show today, and would love to have you do a quick introduction about yourself for the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. It's great to be here. So my name's Steve Hunt. I have had an interesting career. My undergrad degree was applied mathematics, and I was a computer programmer briefly. Wasn't a very good computer programmer. So I went into industrial organizational psychology. That's where I got my PhD. It's the psychology of work. And I've always focused kind of on that mix of computers and psychology to improve business outcomes. And that's what my career is focused on. And when it comes to quality of hire particularly, I've done work across lots of different areas of HR, but I spent a lot of time at various points in my career focused on staffing and recruiting. The most important decision a company ever makes is the decision to hire them. And it's amazingly how companies do this with very little data, which will get us into this conversation of quality of hire. And so I'll talk a little more about that as we get into it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Steve. And this topic around quality in hiring is very much, I would say, underrepresented in conversations. I think we should be talking about it more. We're reactive in that in a lot of ways. So great that we have today this very same topic. To get started, Steve, in your experience, I've seen you in different kinds of roles. What is the definition of quality of hire in your perspective? And has it really changed from where we started and where we are today?
Yeah, I think the definition in quality of hire, it is changing. And we'll talk about that. I think what's changing is a better understanding of how to measure it and what it actually means. But the basic concept of quality of hire is it is the value provided by employees after they moved into a new position. And where it gets a little into definition is that can be attributed, did you put the right person in the right role and welcome to the organization in the right way? So that's kind of what quality of hire is. It really should probably technically be called value of new employees, but no one's going to change the name because it's not so much about the quality of hire, it's the value provided by the hires that a company makes.
Right. And you talk about value. That makes it my next question related to that even more critical. What metrics do you think, directly impact quality or value? How do we sort of, how do we put a
Before
value
I talk
to
about the
that?
metrics that impact it, I talk about sort of the definitions that define it. Because one of the things about quality of hire, first of all, it is not a manager survey. Historically, companies tried to measure quality of hire by asking managers 6 months after the hire, did you like who you hired? Is like, did you make a good decision? You can learn something about asking managers about the quality of their hires, but that's not the same thing as actually truly measuring quality of hire. Quality of hire, I often use the analogy to meals. If you ask somebody, hey, did you have a good meal last night? You probably could answer that pretty quickly. I'll just ask you literally, did you have a good dinner last night?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. But then if you say, well, why? What made it good? Was it the food? Was it the company? Was it the price? Was it the ambiance? There's a lot of things that go into what makes a dinner good or not. And if any one of them drops below a certain level, it doesn't matter how good the company is if the food is terrible, right? Or vice versa, right? So quality of hire is similar. It's in psychology terms, it's a multidimensional, non-compensatory construct. But what that means is it's actually a reflection of multiple different factors. And it's not like you just add them together. If anyone is super good, you might forgive other ones a little bit. If anyone gets below a certain level, it doesn't matter how good the other ones are. And the 4 factors are, and we talk a lot about this on A Shameless Plug, my book, Quality of Hire. It's a very thin book, you can see. So it's very to the point. But we get into this, which is there's really 4 dimensions of quality of hire. First of all, there's retention. If somebody leaves in the first 3 months, clearly something didn't work out, right? And so first one is retention, and you can get a lot of different factors about who's leaving, why they're leaving, things like that. The second one is performance, because we don't pay people just to show up. We pay them to do stuff. So the next one is in-role performance. Do they meet basic expectations? Are they showing up to work on time? Are they doing what we expect them to do? The third one, and I'll explain why it's separate, is extra role performance, going above and beyond. Do they take on overtime work? Do they come up with new ideas? Are they exceptionally high sales performers? And the reason why we separate those two is the things that drive exceptional performance are different from the things that drive in-role performance. And actually, some of the things that drive exceptional performance, like high need for achievement, high career orientation, actually drive turnover. So it's a little bit of like this balancing act. And then the fourth one is self-development, which is, are they trying to build a career in the company, to get promoted, to actively develop themselves? That one, again, in some roles, that's really important. In other roles, it's not as important. And that's why we look at these 4 different metrics. And so when you look at quality of hire, what makes it complicated to measure is it's actually multiple things. But what has changed is the ability to use technology to collect this data. Because now pretty much any large company already has data on all 4 of those things, but it's in all these different systems. And so what CrossCheck, the company I work with, does with the technology is it pulls this data together, allows you to interpret it, use it, and leverage it for other things, which gets to your question now, which was, well, what are the moderators that affect quality of hire? So I'll take a pause before I answer that question. But first, before we talk, the mathematician in me says, before you can define the solution, you need to define the problem. And the problem of quality of hire is it's actually, how do we manage these 4 different things?
Right. That's a very, very interesting point. And, retention to some extent is direct and measurable. Performance in role, I don't know, 6 months, maybe you would know probably the person is doing well. Extra beyond what's expected, it takes time to discover, or at least some amount of consistency, around whether the person is doing one-off time or consistently trying to do above and beyond the role. And the last one, self-development. Again, it's to me, from whatever you said, Steve, it's a complex metrics ecosystem, right?
It's complex, and the challenge is, how do you simplify it without being simplistic? Which again, can you use a manager survey to address some of those? Yeah, that's okay, but it's not going to be enough. But the good news is, especially with the move to cloud technology, Okay, first of all, getting data on retention is pretty simple for most companies if they have an HRIS system. Data on on performance, if companies have, and again, it's going to vary from job to job, but certainly for high volume jobs like call centers or retail jobs, there's a lot of things you can get: attendance data, you can get call center data. There's a lot of places you can get data from. You can get sales data, you can get workforce productivity data if it's in manufacturing. But again, it's not in HR systems, a lot of it's in other systems. That's the same thing with extra role performance. You can also get this data. And self-development, learning management systems, whether people get promoted. Again, there's a lot of places you can get this data from. And that's the challenge. The benefit is once you have this data, the impact that it has is phenomenal. If you look at, and I'm going to get into the moderators here in a second though, but just to give you a point, if you look at most of the machine learning that's being used right now, and you're seeing artificial intelligence, machine learning all over the recruiting space, almost all of those models and systems are being trained on pre-hired data. Like, do their skills match our job descriptions? We don't hire people to have skills match job descriptions. We hire people for what they do after they've been hired. And we're not training our recruiting solutions on what actually matters, which is post-hire data. And actually, I built machine learning. I built one of the very first machine learning, me and a team, back in 2005. It took forever. It was, but we had data. We figured on 5% of the US workforce because we did extremely high volume jobs, and we did neural network modeling. And the single biggest challenge we had, aside from computer speed, was getting good data to train these models on post-hire data. But when we did, we learned amazingly powerful things, which gets into your question about moderators, which I'll just sort of switch for and say, and before I talk about moderators, I always talk about how we need to think about quality of hire. And I use a proverb. There's a grandmother and a grandchild walking through a field, and they come across a turtle sitting on a fence post. And the grandchild says, "That silly turtle thinks it can climb a fence. It's going to fall." And the wise grandmother says, "If you see a turtle on a fence post, someone put it there. It is not the fault of the poor turtle. It's that silly person who put it on a fence post to begin with." That is how I think about quality of hire, because if an employee fails in the first 6 months or whatever for some reason, I'm not saying they don't have some accountability, but it's not their fault. It's why did you put them in the role to begin with? And right. So a lot of when we look at the moderators of quality of hire, it's important to remember, don't blame the employee for being a bad hire. It's something that the company did that put a person into a job they never should have been in the beginning with. And it's not good for anyone to be put in the bad job. It's not good for companies. It's not good for the person either, right? So it gets the question of, well, what are the moderators? What are the things that lead to putting turtles on fence posts? And which I'll dive into. Yeah. But before I go, and there's 3 I'll get into. But before I dive into it, I'll take a breath and let you say something.
No, see, that leads me to this follow-up question. Bad hires happen. And somebody has put the turtle where it doesn't belong.
Yeah.
Right? Very honest question, Steve, in your experience. Who is at fault really? Is it the recruiter? Is it the hiring manager? Is it even the candidate? And what do we do when a bad hire happens?
It is, so let's start with the candidate first. It is only the candidate if the candidate intentionally misrepresents their qualifications. And actually, that's becoming a really big issue because there's a flurry of fake candidates with AI now. Some of them are just people trying to make themselves look good, like getting dressed up for an interview. If somebody uses ChatGPT to do better on an interview, well, who cares? You probably would want them to use ChatGPT on the job too, right? So that's called impression management. That's not so bad. You can take it too far. But there's also a whole slew, particularly in certain industries like technology, of actual honest to goodness fake candidates that are being trying to get into companies to steal intellectual property. So in that case, yes, it's the candidate. But in most cases, the things that impact quality of hire that a company can control, because you can't control what candidates do, but you can control how you react to them. And you can also control who your candidates are. There's 3 things. The one that is the easiest to change, and it's kind of like fine tuning, is the hiring process. Are you sourcing from the right places? Are you selecting people in the right way? And we have, are you engaging the candidates so people aren't dropping out because they don't like what they're going through? And we've seen really interesting things when you measure quality of hire. We've seen companies where when they start measuring quality of hire, they may have been using a selection test for years that they thought, oh, this is really important for job performance. One company had found it was negatively predicting performance. It might have been relevant at one point. And there's statistical issues that they weren't seeing people that were failing miserably, but they wanted the top performers, and the top performers on this test were not better than the average performers. They were worse. So that's one thing that having quality of hire is really useful, is like, how do you tweak your selection process? We've also seen companies where they discover that, like an example, one company really thought that people from certain universities were the best, and they really emphasized hiring people from these certain big name universities. When they started looking at quality of hire data, they found out that actually people from these less big name universities were as good or often better and a lot cheaper to hire. So you start picking up some of the things, but that's the first one. That's the hiring process. That's the easiest, the fastest, but it will only take you so far. I like to say it's like if you buy a new suit or a dress, you can tailor it, but you can only tailor it so much. At a certain point, you got to get a different suit. Which gets to the next big area. So hiring is the first one. The second big moderator of quality of hire is the onboarding process itself. When people come into the company, how are they engaged? How are they trained? How are they socialized in the organization? You can have a great hire who fails, not because they weren't good, but because they weren't welcomed. And we've seen that in companies too. We've seen companies discover certain managers just shouldn't be allowed to have new employees work for them. Not that they're bad managers, they just aren't good at greeting people, right? And training programs, looking at stuff like that. So that's the next one that is probably the easiest to change, but it's a little more harder because you're changing the operations of the company. The third, which is probably the single biggest factor, but is the hardest to change, is the design of the job itself, where we've seen companies where they're unable to get really good candidates because the job is designed in a way such that candidates don't want to do the job. One of my favorite examples of this was a company that was really struggling to hire women, because in the United States, and most countries, women have primary family care responsibilities. And they went and asked people, why won't you work for us? And this is an agricultural company. And the women said, because of childcare. And they said, well, how about if we give you childcare benefits? And they said, so, if we give you childcare benefits, can you work our shifts? And the answer they heard was, how about you give us shifts so we can care for our children? Which would mean we have to redesign our jobs, which no one wanted to hear, right? Oh, no. So those three things, and I guess this gets a little bit, all the example is why quality of hire is so important to measure, because it could be any of these things. And any of these things could have a profound effect. But you've got to figure out which one it is. And you can't figure out which one it is if you don't have good quality of hire data.
All right. Got it. And when we say quality of hire, what about the quality of people that we never hired? We never came into the funnel in the first place.
That is the great question. You cannot know, I say you never hire the applicants that don't apply. But I'd also say you can never know if you have a good hiring process if you don't measure quality of hiring. It may not be broken miserably, right? But are you hiring the best people? If you don't measure quality of hire, you don't know. I'll go back to that example of the hiring people, engineers from a certain college. They're thinking, oh, if they go to that college, they're the best. When they actually looked at quality of hire data and they looked at people that came from a different college who somehow snuck into the company, and they realized our assumption's wrong. There's a lot of candidates we're not even looking at because we're not even marketing to them. And I think that's one of the things, one of the real powers of quality of hire is really challenging, are we sourcing from the best places? Are we making sure people are welcomed into the organization? Because this is a big issue with a cultural relation too, where there was a company that I know that was looking at quality of hire and turnover, and they thought their average turnover wasn't that bad. But when they started looking at quality of hire data, they found that long tenured people who've been here for a long time, they never leave, but we had very high turnover of new employees. Because some of these new employees said, you come in here and it's a bunch of people that have been here forever who frankly don't want to know you. So there's really, that's the challenge of looking at this data. This data is so powerful when you have it, because it affects so many different things. It's on par with like customer satisfaction data and employee engagement data, where it's so central to so many different things. But in the past, we just haven't measured it because it was really hard to measure. I'm saying it's easy to measure now, but it is measurable now. That was very hard to do before. And I think that point you got is there's great candidates out there you're not talking to because you think you're making the best hires, but you don't know if you're making the best hires if you don't measure quality of hire.
True. And maybe, segue to my next question to you, Steve, is one of the things that organizations, especially in the last, let's say, half a decade or a little more than that, has been focusing on a lot of talent marketing, talent branding, talking about, who they are, what's their story, why should you be part of the organization? And I think one of the areas where AI to some extent has been successful, as opposed to your traditional systems, which was very workflow oriented, was to create that outreach, was to create that talent branding and engage more effectively, especially for the folks who are outside. Employees can still manage, right? Now, do you think there are strategies that you would suggest, especially around the talent marketing area, which is more focused on how do we get the right people to apply, which obviously leads you to great quality, which can be measurable and statistically also be measured across the four axis that you've mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think it's really powerful, this, because again, it goes back to the issue that most of these AI tools aren't trained on what actually matters, which is quality of hire. They're trained on whether or not we hired someone, but that's not the goal. It's easy to build an algorithm that will screen people out. The challenge is, are you screening the right people out, right? And that's also true with marketing. The thing about recruiting marketing that's different from regular marketing is you're not just trying to get people to buy stuff. There's certain people you don't want to buy the product, right? And whether or not a hire is good or not, again, isn't based on whether or not you hired them. It's based on what they did after they've been hired. And so I think having better quality of hire data will unlock our ability to do things with recruiting marketing, do traditional A/B testing, and also going back on what kind of people do we want to hire. A good example is career development. In some companies, that's a huge focus. They have a strong promote from within methodologies. There's a lot of economic value in building your own talent versus hiring as it goes up. Are you hiring? Are you recruiting and bringing people into the job that are applying because they want to build a career with your company versus they're just looking for some money till they find another job? Well, if you don't measure quality of hire data, you can't tell that difference. And that kind of gets into it, that if you're trying to build a recruiting marketing strategy to bring in long-term talent, it's going to look different than if you're trying to build a recruiting marketing strategy that says we just need to fill our operational needs for the next 6 months. But if we don't have that data, you can't do it. You're guessing if you don't have quality of hire data.
Absolutely. I can't agree more on that. And in your view, you're talking about data, you're talking about quality of hire being measured, AI systems, traditional systems, it could be anything. But in today's world, do you think that AI can improve decision making based on, what your, matrices might be around quality of hire? And is that really going to make a proactive, positive shifts towards, data-driven, more objective ways of fine-tuning the process itself?
Absolutely. AI is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it can definitely improve hiring. It can also make bad hiring decisions at scale, and there's nothing good about making bad hires quickly, which AI can do. And it can do it, and you can think it's making great hires, but you don't know if you don't measure the actual quality of hire. Again, the first book I wrote, and going back to when I said I had built machine learning, I worked with a company, we built high volume, hourly staffing, machine learning, frontline deskless role staffing technology in like 2005, 2006. And we would build in different measures to predict quality of hire. And then when we did it, when we could track data and we track how long did they stay in the job, their sales performance, their customer service ratings, and then we'd loop this back and we'd do machine learning. It just moved very slowly back then. And we made some really powerful discussions because you'd start, you're always making hiring decisions. You're never just hiring people at random. You have some hypothesis about why do we think this person's going to be better. And I'll give you a good example of where using quality of hire data combined with machine learning led to a very powerful insight. This was a company that was a shoe sales. It sold athletic shoes, like in shopping malls and stuff like that. And they wanted good shoe salespeople. We theorized reasonably that a good retail shoe salesperson would be, one, agreeable. They were nice. And so you'd ask them questions about, do you get along with other people? Do you like having conversations with people? Were they a socially outgoing person? We also thought that they would be a socially confident person, that they would be like, are you the first one to strike up a conversation? Are you comfortable talking to people you don't know? So they would not just be agreeable, they'd also be socially outgoing, which are related but distinct things, which makes sense, right? Yeah, good salesmen should be socially outgoing and they should be nice. What we found was those two things did predict shoe sales, but the best shoe salespeople were very socially outgoing. They'd talk to anyone, but they weren't that nice. They weren't mean, but they're like, I don't want to be your friend. I want to sell you shoes. So if you came into the store, they'd walk up, hey, can I help you? And the person, no, I'm just looking around. Then they'd be like, all right, I'm not going to talk to you. Whereas the person, so it was fascinating because we never would have discovered that because that's a complex, it was a non-linear, interactive, thing, getting the mathematics of it. We never would have discovered that without machine learning and AI. That was sort of one of these insights that we had, super powerful. But on the flip side, if you didn't use quality of hire, you could just make the wrong decisions. Somebody could say, oh, agreeableness is more important than socially outgoing because I don't like in-my-face salespeople. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. You don't like them. They're really effective in this job. And you could easily use AI to train it on the wrong thing, like whether or not we hired them, which is not what matters. It's what they did after they hired. And you could just end up hiring the wrong people at scale and never know it. And not hire the right people, which is probably even a bigger issue.
Absolutely, Steve. In fact, if I was to summarize our conversation, Steve, today, one thing is, are we doing a great job of really measuring quality of hire? Are we getting the right set of people to, first of all, apply for jobs? And do we have a process that's taking care of them and not having churn in between and candidates going through that? Using AI, has its own plus and minus, but it all depends on how do we leverage it and how do we make it use. But I think we do agree that there's a lot of advantage AI can bring in as opposed to traditional systems in terms of data processing ability, speed, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. I want to go on and on. I mean, I had like a ton more questions with me, but respecting everybody's time, I want to kind of ask this one last question, Steve, from here. So we've evolved. Our systems have evolved, our HR systems have evolved. We're talking, HR is one of those areas where you're seeing a lot of AI and new emerging technologies being tried and experimented. But if you were to kind of really look at it for the next half a decade to a decade, and if you really look at it from organizations which are small, mid, large, very large enterprises, etc., right? How do you see this whole process of organizations looking and measuring and evaluating quality of hire? Do you see there's going to be a difference in the way talent leaders are going to look at it? Do you think a mathematical view is what's going to evolve? Do you think a more balanced view? How do you think this is going to move from here?
As we get better at measuring quality of hire, our sophistication of understanding what drives quality of hire is going to go way up. Recognizing that quality of hire it's multidimensional, it's different things, but also that it's influenced not just by recruiting, but by onboarding and by job design, which is one of the reasons why a lot of talent acquisition leaders historically were uncomfortable about owning it because they knew they'd be held accountable for something they can't completely control. So once we have that better data and the technology and using it, I do believe it's going to become a metric as pivotal as employee engagement or customer satisfaction. When I started my career very early on, companies didn't measure employee engagement. People don't realize that. Yeah. And now that is a board level metric in a lot of companies. What shifted is people realized we could measure it. We've gotten more and more sophisticated methods for measuring it, but understand that understanding employee engagement has a lot. It's very valuable for understanding a lot of things that are going on in the organization, both predicting what's going to happen in the future, as well as turnover and, productivity, but also understanding how to change it, through other metrics. Quality of hire is that kind of metric. I guess I would close with an analogy to health. I think I always make analogies: a healthy workforce, healthy body. There's a lot of similarities and stuff. There was a time, there's a few metrics that we've come to realize are incredibly important for our health. And they're just like quality of hire, they affect a lot of things, and they're moderated by a lot of things. Our blood pressure, our sleep, and our daily activity. Before, like smartwatches, people didn't measure those things. You did maybe really infrequently when you went to the doctor, but we couldn't use them to ongoing improve our health and monitor our health. We just didn't know. Blood pressure is probably one of the best examples. This is an incredibly important metric that's affected by a lot of things and affects a lot of things. And we're just going around blindly not knowing. I think I'm healthy. Well, you don't really know. You're going to be walking around with crazy high blood pressure, which is controllable. But if you don't know, you're never going to change it. Same thing with quality of hire. There's companies that are going to think, well, we think we're hiring people who don't see any problems. You don't actually know. You don't know, to your point earlier, who you aren't hiring. You may think you have the best, but you don't know because you don't know who you didn't hire. But you can start looking at that. You don't know how you're onboarding them effectively. You don't know if even the job is designed effectively. It is an absolutely pivotal metric. And as we move more and more into the use of machine learning, AI type algorithms, go back to remember these systems are only as good as the data they're trained on. And what is it you really care as a company? The fact that we hired people or the fact that we're hiring the best people? And I'll tell you, if you ask your CEO, I know which answer they'd give you.
Absolutely. That's wonderfully put, Steve. I can't agree more. The analogy is spot on. And I think you want to have positive, great health in terms of company. Invest in the right metrics to measure quality of hiring. Thank you so much once again, Steve, for being part of this. I would love to continue this conversation on another day and expand on some of those key pointers as well. We'll keep the conversation going, but for today, that's all what we have, guys. Thank you so much for joining in today, and wonderful, Steve, for your time today and for this entire topic being covered around quality of hire. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Arun.